December 6, 1941, 10 p.m. The bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. 61 men are aboard. HMS Perseus, a British submarine making a routine passage through enemy-controlled waters. In the darkness of the engine room, a man named John Capes is lying drunk in a makeshift bunk inside a torpedo rack. Then an explosion. The stern of the submarine rockets upward. Capes is thrown from his bunk. The lights go out. Water begins pouring in through the seals. They are sinking, and John Capes is 270 feet below the surface with no way out. He survived, he swam to shore. He hid on the Greek island for 18 months behind enemy lines. He made it home. And then the British military called him a liar. Before we get to the submarine, we need to talk about how John Capes ended up on it. Because he was never supposed to be on HMS Perseus at all. In 1941, Capes was a leading stoker, an engine room engineer aboard a different submarine, HMS Thrasher. He had a reputation. He was smart, resourceful, and by all accounts a natural storyteller. He was also a member of the upper class, which, in the rigid British class system at the time, meant he should have held an officer's rank. He didn't. That would later matter more than anyone could have guessed. Earlier that year, Capes had crashed his car into a horse and cart. An ordinary accident, except with a war on. The courts couldn't settle the case. So they did what the British military did in those days. They sent him to serve his country and deal with it later. By late 1941, the case was finally resolved. Capes was ordered back to Malta to close it out, and then he needed transport back to his post in Alexandria, Egypt. The most convenient option was HMS Perseus, which was heading that direction anyway. He wasn't a crew member, he was a passenger, hitching a lift. Not even listed on the official crew manifest when the ship departed Malta on November 26th. That missing name on the list would later be used against him. HMS Perseus was built in 1929, one of 6 Parthian-class submarines in the Royal Navy and among the first to carry the Mark 8 torpedo. She was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Edouard Nicolay, a decorated officer who had already sunk 2 Italian ships and earned himself a Distinguished Service Order. The mission was a routine patrol of the southern Aegean islands on the way home. Standard procedure, nothing unusual, until the night of December 6th, at 10 p.m. HMS Perseus struck an Italian mine 7 miles off the coast of Kefalonia in the Ionian Sea. The explosion hit the bow. The stern lurched violently upward. In the engine room, John Capes was thrown from his bunk as the lights died and the submarine began its final descent. He didn't panic. He reached for the flashlight he knew was stored near the escape hatch, because knowing where the flashlight was is exactly the kind of thing a leading stoker drills into himself. And then he went looking for survivors. What he found instead were bodies. The engine room was full of wreckage and dead crew members. At the forward bulkhead he could hear the pressure on the other side, the sea pushing against the door with tremendous force, water leaking through the rubber seals. He kept looking. He found 3 men injured, stunned, but alive. He led them back to the stern compartment. He sealed the watertight door behind them. He found his bottle of rum still in the torpedo rack where he'd left it and gave each man a drink. Then he found the Davis submerged escape apparatus set to rubber rebreather vests with oxygen masks and goggles, stored for exactly this kind of situation. He handed one to each man and put one on himself. There was one problem. The equipment was rated for a maximum depth of 100 feet. The depth gauge read 270 feet. They were more than twice as deep as the equipment was designed to handle. At that pressure, the oxygen delivered would become toxic. The ascent would almost certainly cause decompression sickness. The bends where nitrogen gas bubbles form in the bloodstream and can cause agonizing pain, paralysis, or death. John Capes looked at the gauge. Then he made a decision. He found the sluice valve, the underwater flare gun poured and opened it. Water poured in, rising around the 4 men. Capes waited. He waited as the water climbed to their waists, their chests, their chins. He was waiting for the pressure inside the compartment to equalize with the pressure outside. When it did, he took a spanner and unbolted the escape hatch. It opened. He guided the 3 men out. Then he swam up after them. The bends hit him almost immediately. As Capes rose from the depths, the nitrogen in his bloodstream began to expand. He felt a crushing pain in his chest. He tried to slow his ascent to let his body adjust. It didn't help. The pain was overwhelming. He kept swimming. The 3 men he had rescued didn't make it. By the time Capes broke the surface, he was alone in the dark Mediterranean, gasping for air, his chest on fire. Of the 61 men aboard HMS Perseus, only John Capes had survived. He looked around. In the distance, white cliffs, Kefalonia Island. It was 5 miles away. John Capes, drunk when the mine hit, half crushed by decompression, alone in an enemy-controlled waters in the middle of the night, started swimming. 6 hours later, he crawled onto the beach and passed out. He had made it to dry land, which was occupied by the enemy. Greece in December 1941 was under Axis control. Italian forces occupied Kefalonia. Resources were being seized. People were being starved. Getting caught would mean death or a prison camp. The islanders found him first. In one of the most quietly remarkable acts of courage in the entire war, the people of Kefalonia, at enormous personal risk, sheltered John Capes for 18 months. He was moved from house to house, hidden from Italian patrols, fed by families who didn't have enough food for themselves. He lost 70 pounds. He dyed his hair black to blend in. He learned enough Greek to pass, and he waited. Finally, in May 1943, 18 months after the Perseus sank, the Royal Navy organized a rescue. Capes was smuggled off Kefalonia aboard a fishing boat, transported across the Mediterranean to neutral Turkey, where he reached the British consulate in Smyrna. From there, he completed the journey to Alexandria that had begun a year and a half earlier. He was awarded the British Empire Medal for meritorious service, and then came the part that defined the rest of his life. His name wasn't on the Perseus crew manifest. He'd been a passenger, an afterthought, and in wartime paperwork, afterthoughts get forgotten. The British military had ordered submarine commanders to bolt their escape hatches from the outside to prevent enemy divers from using them to access the vessels. If that order had been followed on Perseus, Capes couldn't have escaped, which meant his story was either proof that an order had been disobeyed or that he was lying. Then there was the depth. The escape equipment was rated to 100 feet. Capes claimed he'd escaped from 270 feet. The deepest recorded submarine escape at that time was around 100 feet. What Capes was claiming would be, if true, the deepest successful submarine escape in history. It simply wasn't believable. He had a reputation as a storyteller. His account changed slightly in details over the decades. There were no witnesses. By the time John Capes died in 1985, his own country largely considered him either deluded or a fraud. He had spent 40 years telling a story that almost no one believed. He died without vindication. On December 26, 1997, 12 years after John Capes died, Greek divers found the wreck of HMS Perseus on the floor of the Mediterranean, 52 meters beneath the surface, about 170 feet, not 270. The depth gauge inside the submarine had been broken in the explosion. Capes had read a faulty instrument, hadn't escaped from 270 feet. He'd escaped from 170, which was still, by every measure, the deepest successful submarine escape ever recorded, and it explained how he'd survived equipment rated only to 100 feet. The divers documented everything they found. The cracked bow, consistent with a mine explosion exactly where Capes said it happened. The aft escape hatch open, exactly as he described. The stern compartment, no bodies, just as he said. The sluice valve, open, an empty bottle of rum in a torpedo rack. Every single detail of John Capes' story, verified on the seabed of the Mediterranean. 56 years after the sinking, the wreck is still there. A memorial was erected on Kefalonia in 2000. The islanders who hid him, the ones who risked their lives for a stranger they had no reason to protect, are honored on a plaque that reads, "Dedicated to the patriotic islanders who put courage before fear." Here's what I keep thinking about. The bravest thing John Capes did wasn't escaping from a sinking submarine. It wasn't swimming 5 miles through enemy waters. It wasn't surviving 18 months in hiding. It was telling the truth over and over, for 40 years, to people who were absolutely certain he was lying, and never stopping. If you made it to the end of this one, you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Drop a comment telling me, do you think the British military ever truly made it right? He got a medal, but nobody publicly said we were wrong. Is that enough? If you want more stories like this, the ones history buried, the ones nobody believed, subscribe. We post every week. And next time I've got a story that makes this one look like a warm-up.